Hello everyone, welcome to another day, another video. Hopefully everyone's having a swell-licious day so far. I'm curious to see what we're bracing for impact here. I'm not sure what this video is about, so we're going in blind on this video. But yeah, hopefully you guys grab some popcorn, maybe a soda or a water, and let's get straight into this video and see what it's all about.
The biggest risk to the United States economy was never the AI bubble. It was never China, and it was never the orange man in the Oval Office. It's something much more boring, and it's something you've likely never heard about, unless you've gone deep down the finance rabbit hole.
I'm going to assume this is going to be about finances, which is kind of suitable for the last video we did, which is gambling.
And that's exactly why nobody's paying attention to it. Because if you've been wondering why mortgage rates refuse to fall, why...
So I found out when it came to house buying with my dad when he was younger, for him to be able to afford his first ever house, is they had it where there was no down payment. And my dad's like, I feel like the only way people are going to be able to get a house in certain locations, in most locations, is if they get rid of the down payment and you just pay for the lawyer fee and all that stuff, which you only need probably like $3,000 really saved up. And I was like, wow, that'd be actually really nice. And then my dad was like, well, it'd be really, the banks would love that, but the government's preventing it from happening. But yeah, no, the banks will love it because that means they get more interest and more money off of you at the end of the day. But yeah, no, if they, I hope they, I'd be kind of cool if they actually did that, because then I could actually buy a house instead of having to wait probably like another 4 more years before I can actually look more into house buying.
Stocks randomly freak out every few months, and why the Federal Reserve can talk about cutting rates, but financial conditions...
My question is, will this video be more about America, or will it also count sort of more on the Canadian side as well?
...still feel tight? The answer doesn't start in Washington. It starts in Tokyo, and more specifically, in the most boring asset on Earth, Japanese government bonds. Because the country best known for attracting American weebs has also been the duct tape quietly holding the global financial system together for the past 30 years, and that duct tape is starting to peel. But to understand why Japan is so important, you first have to rewind...
Well, obviously they're important because they have waifus and kakos
...to the early
and maid ladies.
90s. Because 30 years ago, in 1992, Japan's asset bubble burst, real estate collapsed, equities collapsed, and Japan entered what became known as the Lost Decades. It was a 3-decade-long period of being financially f***ed. There was no real growth, no inflation, and no wage expansion.
Is that good? Does things need to always inflate and get more expensive and all that jazz? Is it okay if it just stays neutral and doesn't go up or down? I feel like that'd be fine.
It was like the economy hit pause, and nobody could find the remote. So the Bank of Japan did what central banks do when they're out of options. They cut rates to zero, and then they cut rates below zero. And then, when that wasn't enough, they introduced something called yield curve control, which sounds like a Marvel villain, but actually just means... we're going to cap long-term bond yields, whether the market likes it or not. Basically, the Japanese government superglued interest rates to the floor, so for decades, Japanese government bonds yielded pretty much nothing, and that created massive problems for Japanese investors. Because imagine you're a Japanese life insurer, pension fund, or even a bank. You have a $1 billion investment portfolio, and your domestic government bonds are paying you 0%. This pretty much leaves you with 2 choices. 1, accept no return on your cash, or 2, go shopping overseas.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, if you're giving someone $1 million and you're getting only $1 million back, you're not making any money. So, and banks need to make money to be paying for their workers and stuff, and obviously for the greed side, you know?
And they chose option 2. So Japan entered a multi-decade-long global shopping spree that led them to become the largest foreign holder of U.S. treasuries, one of the largest buyers of U.S. mortgage-backed securities, and the world's largest net creditor nation, which is just the formal way of saying Japan.
So it sounds like U.S. is screwed.
Japan became the world's ATM, and it's not because Japan just loves sending capital to America, but it's because the math made sense. And here's how it worked. Meet Bob. Bob wants to start making some money through investing. So Bob goes to the Japanese markets and borrows money in yen at near zero interest rates. Then Bob converts that yen into dollars and buys U.S. treasuries that yield 4%. And after hedging costs and fees, he pockets the spread. And that's what became known as the yen carry trade. Investors would borrow in yen at near zero interest rates and then invest in foreign assets that yielded higher returns.
That's interesting.
And when investors' borrowing costs are near zero, they don't just buy treasuries. They buy tech stocks, they buy real estate, and they buy into emerging markets. Basically, if it's got a pulse and it yields more than 0%, they'll buy it. And that's why for years, this trade became one of the largest sources of global liquidity. At its peak, the yen carry trade was estimated by some banks to be in the trillions. It was like the global markets were running on Japanese Wi-Fi. But the problem was that the entire trade relied on one assumption that held everything together, that Japanese yields would stay near zero forever. But in 2024, that assumption broke when the Bank of Japan ended its yield curve control policy, and Japan raised interest rates for the first time in 17 years.
Why would they change that? It's got to be for like greed reasons, right? Like if you have a system that's working, why gamble on changing that?
And then they raised them again. And immediately following that,
Oh, I can't see COVID being a thing because they said 2024. COVID was like back in 2017.
second rate hike decision, the S&P 500
Holy cow, that's a lot of red.
dropped 6%, and Japan's index, the Nikkei 225, plummeted over 12% in a single day,
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
marking its worst drop since 1987. It was a clear signal that markets were officially spooked. Because when Japanese yield
And that's the problem with the market. It's like if people get spooked and they see a lot of red, they're going to bail out and so they don't lose money, and it's just going to drop things faster and faster. And obviously once things go down, that's the perfect time to put your money in because then you're going to make more money.
rise, two things happen. One, borrowing in yen becomes more expensive. And
Yeah.
two, hedging currency risk becomes more expensive too. And suddenly, the free money trade isn't so free anymore. And that 4% US Treasury Bob was looking at doesn't look so good anymore. And this was the beginning of the end for the yen carry trade. Because now the math had flipped, and the trade was no longer a no-brainer. And when the math flips, the capital flows flip too. And the money that flowed out of Japan for decades was starting to return home. And this is what's called repatriation, and it's one of the biggest threats in global markets today. Because investors are starting to realize the uncomfortable truth. The cheapest source of global liquidity for the past 30 years is no longer cheap. But here's why it actually matters. Because for decades, Japan wasn't just some random buyer of US debt. They were one of the most consistent, price-insensitive buyers of long-term treasuries. And the yields on those long-term treasuries? Well, they aren't set by Jerome Powell. The Federal Reserve controls short-term rates. But the 10-year, 20-year, and 30-year? Well, those yields are largely determined by supply and demand. And the problem is, everyone's staring at the wrong lever. And here's legendary investor and founder of the world's largest hedge fund, Ray Dalio, to explain it.
Watch the bond market. The bond market is the basis, it's the backbone of all markets.
See, this is one thing I wouldn't mind getting more knowledgeable at is trades and stocks and all that jazz. I feel like if you can learn and know what you're doing, you can do it. You can make some good money. It's like with my first time home buyers account and my retirement account. That runs through stocks and trades and all that jazz. But I have people in the background that work on it. So if things start going down, they'll bail out. Or if they see things going down, they'll put money in, and when it goes back up, I'm making money. That's why sometimes my accounts will drop dramatically because something happened, but they work on the background, and then it starts shooting up again. So I wouldn't mind doing something like that, but with my own money instead of just every paycheck I put $100 on this account. I'd maybe make separate like $50 a paycheck I'd put towards these stocks or something and see if I could make the money go up or not.
It is the risk-free, meaning default-free problem.
Because at the end of the day, I really, really, really don't want to work any time past 65. I'm doing what I can to make sure once I hit 65 I don't have to work again. And like I said last video, if I can make it where I can retire sooner, I'm doing that because I don't like working. I don't think anyone does, and I'm gonna work hard now, so hopefully down the road I can retire early and enjoy my life while I have it.
Probably default-free. Interest rate that determines what all asset returns are going to be. And when there is a breakdown of the supply-demand picture for the bond market, you see a certain type of market action. You see long rates rising relative to short rates. You see the currency go down. You see gold go up because there's a movement.
I've been told that if you can get like gold and silver and stuff, that's something really good to have for like long-term money in case something were to happen. Because I believe those things don't really go down in value too much.
Out of that bond market because there's a supply and demand imbalance. When that happens, that raises interest rates.
I feel like that's what Canada has right now with housing market. We don't have enough housing for the demand that we have for need of them. So they can get away with having houses being sold for a lot more. But there's going to be a point where no one can buy houses, and all these millionaires have outbought all these houses and stuff. And I could see a house crash happening. But until that happens, things are just going to get more expensive in Canada when it comes to housing. Yeah.
And it puts the Federal Reserve and other central banks in a bind.
So while everyone is hyperanalyzing Jerome Powell's press conferences like it's a new GTA 6 trailer, they're looking at the wrong end of the yield curve.
How much you guys want to bet that GTA 6 isn't even going to come out this year?
Because while the Fed has some indirect influence on long-term rates, what they really control is short-term rates, the overnight rate. But the long end of the yield curve is driven more by supply and demand. And when you add in the fact that the United States is running trillion-dollar deficits annually, even a slight reduction in demand matters. Because the Treasury has to issue massive amounts of new debt every year just to keep the lights on in the economy. And as this debt issuance keeps growing, someone has to absorb it. And for the last
I wonder how bad things have to get before a huge recession begins.
few decades, Japan was a key part of that absorption machine. But before I explain why if Japan backs out, we are totally f***ed, a quick pause, because this video is sponsored by Gamma. I personally use Gamma because the hardest part about creating finance videos isn't the research. It's turning scattered ideas into a clear and real polished output. Here's how I've been using it. First, I'll start inside Claude and upload whatever data, research reports, or you can find it directly inside Claude connectors. Thank you again to Gamma for sponsoring this video.
Now back to how Japan I highly recommend,
our
guys.
Economy. Because if one of the largest historical buyers of United States Treasuries stops buying, then yields have to rise to attract new buyers. And that's how supply and demand shape long-term bond yields. But that's also how you can get a situation where the Fed cuts the federal funds rate, short-term yields fall, but long-term yields stay elevated, and that's how you get what's called a steepening yield curve. And if this happens and long-term rates stop cooperating, then it stops being just a bond market story, and then becomes an everything story. Because when analysts build models to value stocks, they discount cash flows using long-term yields as a baseline. And when long-term yields remain elevated, the present value of future cash flows in these models decreases, which means valuations compress and stocks trade at lower multiples. So even if earnings are fine, the price investors are willing to pay for those earnings changes. And that's why markets can suddenly feel unstable, even when the headlines look calm. But it doesn't just stop at the stock market, because the 10-year Treasury yield isn't just some nerdy number on Bloomberg. It sets the price of money and is the foundation of nearly every asset valuation. And mortgage rates are another example of this, because, like stock valuations, mortgage rates are largely anchored to long-term Treasury yields. So, if the 10-year yield doesn't meaningfully fall, mortgage rates don't magically drift back to 3%. So the Fed can cut the federal funds rate all they want, but if global demand for treasuries weakens, then the long end of the yield curve stays pinned.
So then if you have a mortgage at like 4%, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's going to stay at 4%. Where some things, shorter terms, they'll be cut short, like smaller with interest, but long terms stay the same.
And when that happens, mortgage rates stay high, housing affordability stays strained, refinancing activity stays muted, and home transactions slow.
Then is there no way where we could just swap that? Like have smaller terms, keep their normal interest, and then have longer terms, cut their interest? I'm assuming they don't do that because it's just not how it works. Because I feel like with long-term ones, I'm imagining make a lot more money, and if they cut those, there's a lot less money, and it'd be scary for a lot of people.
But it's not just mortgage rates and equity valuations, because if you zoom out even further to corporate credit, it's the same story. If you remember back when capital was cheap in 2020 and 2021, when rates were suppressed, companies were issuing debt like it was Black Friday, and interest rates were 90% off. And when companies have access to cheap financing, we see increased deal flow, higher valuations, and more activity. And that's because credit is the bloodstream of the corporate world. But if borrowing costs stay elevated, we see the opposite. We see risk appetite fall, growth slow, and capital tighten. And this is the main point of the video, because for 30 years, the United States benefited substantially from being on the receiving end of the world's largest carry trade, and now that trade is unwinding. And as Ray Dalio said, the bond market is the backbone of all markets and the interest rate that determines what all asset returns are going to be. And what we are currently seeing is a tangible catalyst reshaping the foundation of the bond markets. And there's a reason why traditional financial media is ignoring.
So things will either end up becoming a real stinky hole more than it is, or they're going to end up making things work out and we're going to be okay.
This. It's because it's not clickable, and because it wouldn't trend on Twitter. Nobody wants to hear, let's discuss the cross-currency carry trade and how Japanese institutions are reallocating capital. Because that...
I think you could do that. You just have to make sure you got Subway Surfers on the one side of the screen and Temple Run 2 on the other side of the screen.
Requires patience and nuance and more brain cells than doom scrolling allows for. Instead, people want inflation, they want AI, and they want whatever Nvidia did last week.
I don't think everyone wants AI or inflation.
They want the topics that are visible, loud.
Oh, that's what he means. That's what people want to see, not the more important things.
And create headlines. So instead, the narratives become dramatically oversimplified to, if the Fed cuts rates, financial conditions will ease. And that's not necessarily true. And that's the lie we're being sold. That one rate cut fixes everything, that liquidity is automatic, and that someone, somewhere, will always show up to buy our debt. But what if they don't? And what if the largest foreign holder of...
See, my question is there even any way for a country to get out of debt? Like, it sounds like every single country on this planet is all billions or trillions of dollars in debt. Is there no way we can get out of debt? Or is every country just doomed to be in debt forever? Everyone's always giving money to their neighbors and stuff, or people from the other side of the country to help their country out or whatever. But is there no way we can just maybe focus on our own countries and work towards getting ourselves out of debt?
Of U.S. Treasuries decides to take a step back.
Maybe I'm not
then
understanding
you see global
something.
liquidity
Maybe we
tighten,
have to be giving
and
people
liquidity is the oxygen
money.
of markets. And when it tightens, well, that's the cost of money changing everywhere. And like I covered, it affects everything, from stock valuations to mortgage rates to corporate credit. And that's why I made this channel, because I want to shine a light on the issues that actually matter, the issues that traditional financial media won't touch because they don't get clicks. So if you're interested in knowing about what's actually happening in financial markets, hit subscribe and turn notifications on, because I'll be covering the stuff that traditional financial media won't.
No, that's definitely good to know. I can see people not being interested in a lot of this stuff, like the mass majority of the mass of humans, because it's not the most interesting thing to listen to, but it is important to sort of have a heads up on what things could be sort of looking like in the future if things don't change. But yeah, good video. Casual Finance, good job. I give this video a like. Make sure you guys give it a like as well if you enjoyed the video. Give the person subscribe if you want more of their channel stuff. And yeah, don't forget to give me a like and a subscribe if you guys wouldn't mind. And yeah, leave a comment down below what you guys' thoughts are on all this. It was interesting. Very good. Okay, you guys have a good one. Take care. Peace and God bless you all. Adios.